Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Demystifying Design. And this one, I'm actually going to be refactoring the way that the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia's account settings page looks. I use it on a regular basis, and I'm sure most of you have your own healthcare dashboards, and they're all kind of a mess. So I figured this would be a good one to start out with. As you can see here, the current experience has the navigation going across the top, big iconography. It's clear that you're on each individual page, but it takes up a lot of space. And then as you continue to go down the page, there's just a lot of vertical space and not very clear where you should look to get certain pieces of information. So I'm going to do my best to refactor this and I'm going to speed through the process so you can get an insight into the decisions I'm making as I'm going through without having to watch the whole damn thing. So hopefully you enjoy it. Let me know in the comments if you think this takes a little too long. It should be a little shorter, or if you'd like more commentary, less commentary. But let me just get right into it. So I started out with the navigation here. I thought it was a pretty straightforward navigation experience already. I didn't want to change it too much because I didn't really know what customers wanted out of the larger experience. I just wanted to tidy up the existing navigation and make it look aesthetically pleasing and make it a little more user-friendly. Ended up opting to put the navigation for the account menu inside its own little sub menu off to the side. I found this is usually what people want, especially when you have a very complicated menu, which we don't in this case, but it's just nice to logically separate the account functionality into its own little space and then separate it for when people want to engage in something related to their account. They can just click the drop down and get all the options related to their account there. It doesn't invade the main navigation experience. So just ignore this here, the very substantial change that's happened to the body content. I actually went back and revisited the navigation bar after playing around with the body content for a little while and decided to use this standard white background with a box shadow to indicate that there's separation in some way between the two parts, the navigation and the body content. And I think this is a much more intuitive and clean way to do that. Moving on to the footer now, I didn't really change it that much. Generally, when you're working with a web app, I'm in the camp that a footer should be fairly minimal, right? You want the focus of the experience to be on using the app, so the footer should be as small as possible, with only the absolutely critical things that you need on there. So like privacy policy, language picker, things like that. So I just copied, like I did for the header navigation. Just copied the same navigation from the experience that was there already and refactored the way it was laid out to make it more clean and user-friendly. I added in social media here, and I actually removed this later because I think it's more or less kind of distracting from the overall experience of using the web app. I thought that was a good call when I removed it, but for now I put it in here in a way that doesn't really distract the user from the experience. But ultimately I think this was a bad decision. But one of the things that I'm trying to highlight with this series is that a lot of design is just making bad decisions and then realizing they're bad and moving on from them, and then iterating and iterating, going to sleep, waking up the next day and trying again. So the social media buttons is one example of that. I wanted to replicate the call to action that they had. It seemed like a persistent footer call to action with this orange little icon and the link in the text. But I wanted to make it much more aesthetically pleasing, and I wanted to simplify the way the message was perceived from the call to action in a very discrete chunk. So that whole line of text there was about protecting your identity, so I just took that blurb out and made it a title. And now when you look at the call to action here, you're like, oh, protect your identity. Anyone who's thinking that that's a concern for them will go ahead and commit to reading the rest of the text. But before, you had to read the whole line of text, and it was kind of obscure and small to realize if it was relevant for you. So just really thinking about the user there and minimizing the amount of work they need to do to accomplish the goal of the experience, which is, hey, I'm interested in this offering, I might actually click learn more. And here's where I realized that I was a little overzealous with the amount of content I had in the footer, and I just kind of removed the vast majority of it. Like I said earlier, when you're really focused on having a functional user experience in a web app, the footer is almost always not part of that. You should have a footer just to indicate that you've reached the end of the page, and generally you'll need privacy links, things like that, but the vast majority of the value of the experience is in the body content. So I wanted to just get rid of as much superfluous content in the footer as possible, and as you can see, I got rid of those social media links too. Moving on to the body here, after doing a lot of research into different account pages across the board, I found a lot that were really well designed. The GitHub account page, the Stripe account page, they all had this menu on the left hand side, and the current Blue Cross Blue Shield navigation was kind of at the top, and it was big iconography. It was kind of weird, so I figured it would make sense to put the menu on the left and then have the content compartmentalized on the right, so that we could have people select the category of the settings they wanted to modify on the left, and then find everything logically grouped on the right, so that your eye would naturally find the information that they were looking for within that category. Now, one thing I want to note here is this menu on the left took me a very long time to do. It took me a very long time. I think I did something like 20 iterations on it before I came to a final, this makes sense aesthetically decision. And the same applies for the body content here, but I'll just let you watch kind of how that evolves for now. I wanted to emphasize the editability of these fields a little more. So obviously you can't change your name, but for the rest of the ones that were editable, it wasn't particularly clear that you could do that because of the way I had things laid out. So I decided to gray the background of each individual field here to make sure that it was distinguished from the background, and it kind of implied, hey, this is a little different, maybe I can click this and make a change. Yeah, I added the Save Changes button in here, but after looking at best practices on how this is done, how changes are saved across the board, I ended up removing this and just having the changes save automatically once you edited the field, and then prompting the user that has occurred, and then allowing them to undo the change. But for now, as you can see, this is another example of just doing something wrong the first time and then learning and iterating on the design. Wanted to add some simple breadcrumbs here. Having played around with the Blue Cross Blue Shield account experience quite a bit, I realized that the navigation is very complicated. There's lots of different pages within pages and pages. There's a very complicated hierarchy. So I figured breadcrumbs in this situation would make a lot of sense to help people not feel lost inside the dashboard when they logged in. I think there's also a pretty good example here of using opacity to control the way that people look at something. So generally when you have something that you want to be there, but you don't necessarily need users' attention to go straight to it, you can make it a little more opaque and it will fade out slightly. As long as you don't make it very unreadable, because you got to consider accessibility there. It's a good way of just controlling the visual hierarchy on the page. So this is the point where I realized that in security and privacy, I needed to have a password reset field and some kind of account phone number and security questions field. So that's what you're seeing me try and navigate now. Another big mistake I made here is you'll notice me spend quite a bit of time messing around with this change your password experience, and this was a big blunder on my behalf. I should have known that the better way to control an experience like this is to pull the user away from that particular form into a more discrete form with only the password fields. Generally you want to do this when you have a smaller experience that's a little more involved than the rest of the input fields. You just want to isolate it inside a modal or something. So I ended up changing this to be a button that you would click to reset the password, and you'll see that manifest itself shortly. Here I wanted to indicate to the user in some way that their phone number was verified, but I didn't want it to be I didn't want it to pull so much attention that it was the main focal point of the experience, so I ended up just making this little badge very small and fading it out a little bit. And you'll also notice later on that I add the verify now link just so I could show how I would build both states, the verified and hey, you should verify experience for the account recovery phone number. Yeah, so once again, I put this change button here and ended up removing it eventually because I changed the whole way that changes were made to any of these fields by just having them saved by default. So again, another one of these things that you just you implement it the first time, and then later on when you're designing things, you come back and you refactor it. That's really how the design process goes, at least for me. See, I'm changing the way that change password works. I think at this point, this was actually day 2 of redesigning this. I was pretty satisfied with the solution, but I always like to sleep on the design and come back to it the next day. So that's, you saw the lighting change just a little bit in my room there in the lower right, because I came back to it and I just added a whole bunch of polish here. Yeah, so like I said earlier, spent way too long on this sidebar menu. Eventually, I decided to stick to, I think, the grayed out background black text, because I didn't want to pull people's attention to this sidebar menu as much as I wanted to pull their eyes towards the content on the right. Because once they've selected the thing in the sidebar, they've selected the category, they know they've selected it, and there's really no need to pull their eyes there. You just want to confirm that that's the selected option, but then pull their eyes over to the sectioned content on the right so they could find exactly what they needed to find, exactly what they were looking for within the subcategories on the right. Just changing the blue to be more close to the standard Blue Cross Blue Shield blue, because I didn't really want to mess with the brand color scheme too much there. And here you'll see this is where I started building out the changes saved experience. So you see this very commonly nowadays, where you want to express to the user that the changes they've made have been confirmed, right? So they've been saved to the database, but you give them an option to undo that change in case it was an accident, right? Or they forgot the password they typed and they're like, oh man, I forgot what I did, I want to undo it. So this is a little toast notification that would pop up on the left after anyone has edited any of the fields, except of course the password, because that's its own unique experience. This is me creating the pop-up modal for the change password experience. Again, just to re-emphasize here, the reason I'm doing this is because it's changing the password is much more involved than changing any other field. If you're changing your address or something, you just edit the address, right? And then if it's wrong, well, I'm sure you would deal with that through customer support or something. They'd let you know in some way. But the password field, you need to go through this process of typing your current password and making sure that you confirm the new password. It's much more involved. So I wanted to separate the experience from the larger the larger form, to make it easy for people to just discreetly focus on that task and get it done really efficiently in its own modal. Alright, so here is the previous account settings page with important information blurred out. Lots of text, lots of vertical space being used. It's not bad, but here's the new one, which is much more user-friendly and uses color and the structure of the page itself to pull people to the appropriate parts of the site and make it easier for them to interact with it. And there we go. I think that's a good first episode. But like I said earlier, I think it might be a little bit too long. Kind of speeding things through things a little too quickly, so it's kind of hard to see what's actually going on. But let me know what you think in the comments. Should I do shorter, smaller experiences and just show you the whole thing? Or would you rather I splice things up and show you less of the mistakes I make and more of just, hey, here's how I ended up at a solution and here's my thought process behind it? But I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, feel free to leave some feedback below so I can learn and grow and make the channel better as I go. Thanks for your time, folks. Have a lovely day.